when I went up to the Met and took a look at the space, the thing that immediately stood out to me is just this very strong horizontality of the space. It's about a 5-foot tall space, and it's a good 53 feet long. What I was interested in was engaging that space, and it seemed like it would make sense to kind of engage it almost as a narrative, where you could see one moment, on its own, but also understand how it fit into the larger scope of the piece. The conversation that I was having was about doing a work that did engage the space, that was maybe a little bit more installational in nature, kind of expansive. And it struck me that that's really not typical in their collection. And maybe more typical are works of art that have been displayed throughout history, often in frames or on pedestals. So that was kind of a starting off point where I thought, well, what if I start with exactly what you might expect, with framed pieces, with pieces that are more self-contained, maybe more traditional in the nature of their presentation, kind of self-contained images within frames. And then the frame starts to break open, and then you get a little something that you might not have expected before. And so that's where this work starts. It starts with 2 panels that are framed, completely self-contained, and then this 3rd panel here kind of starts to break open a little bit. And so what you're seeing here is just it's a very crude mock-up, but these cardboard pieces really mimic the frame as the frame is cut and starts separating, as these structures also, where they begin as self-contained whole structures with windows, frames, they also start breaking open. So you see the process behind them. So you see the scaffolding that is kind of the skeletal structure underneath. And so as you go down that wall, that separation and kind of distortion of presentation becomes more pronounced with each panel. And so here the frame has separated, and there's actually this little satellite frame that kind of is spawned and going off the edge, at the same time as the imagery becomes more about a construction site that's actually broken down into its respective parts. And I think it's also about maybe transformation of the imagery from something that is sort of recognizable as an urban landscape to something that's more about process and building and construction, deconstruction, to something where further down the line in this span of the piece, it actually, in some areas will break down so far that you might not recognize it as a building. It might be more about this grid with little squares that are coming out of it that once were the windows and the facade, but now it's more about an abstract moment. So it's about the composition of imagery through abstract parts as opposed to kind of a representational core. This whole darker kind of green-gray was one structure, and now it's been cut and separated so that it's breaking open, and these other layers are kind of expanding through its center. And so in a way that just reflects this idea of a building in all of its layers. So at the very, very end down here, the frame will really be completely fragmented into the face of the frame and the strainer and the plexi, and each individual kind of printed element will be separated and actually starting to cut apart so that you really see almost just dotted lines, kind of squares, almost the elements of kind of the building blocks of imagery itself. All of these pieces actually were made through a process of drawing, hand drawing initially, and then translating that through a digital process into files that could be cut using a laser cutter. Those cut out pieces get printed either with flat layers of color, or in some cases there are kind of these fine lines that add to the structure and give you more information about the shape of that I-beam or the other kind of holes that might go through it. And so that would get printed on top of the cutout with a linoleum relief cut. that's carved specifically to fit that laser cut element. And then I have this whole toolbox, right? I have this whole table full of little building blocks of buildings and different patterns of scaffolding, different structures and ladders and things. And then I get to start putting it together. And so it's not that I think about this building and how it's going to be from the very get-go and then make its respective parts. It's that I have all these parts and then I get to play with how it might fit together. Rather than being a specific collection of buildings, it's more about the process of building, the process of construction that really does relate to so many cities and so many urban contexts. And that's what I'm interested in constructing here, is a landscape that doesn't have a specific geographical location, but that kind of relates in its non-specificity to our contemporary urban world.
I'm Samantha Rickner, an Associate Curator in the Department of Drawings and Prints, and we're standing here in the balcony lounge. We asked Nicola to be the first artist to make a commission for the lounge. The piece will be up for 3 years. She's really, in my mind, working in drawings and prints, one of the most innovative printmakers working today. Annabelle Seldorf, the architect of the space, absolutely responded to Nicola's work. Everyone saw that it just added a new dimension to the space. And as a work of art, stands absolutely on its own. They really loved the idea that you were no longer looking at a work behind glass in a kind of precious way, in a way that museum viewers are used to looking at a work, but that you could actually see the process of the making, that pieces of the print and the mylar were slowly escaping their frame, and there's a sort of seriousness about the work, but there's also a playfulness about it that I think people pick up on, absolutely.